and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, and today's author conversation comes to us from Canada. Lauryn Chamberlain is an American who currently lives in Canada with her husband, and she is the author of Who We Are Now. This is her second book, so we talk all things sophomore slump, inspiration, all of that. So take a look at this conversation. Welcome to Literary Hype. It's so exciting to have you on the show. We are going to be talking about your brand new book, baby, Who We Are Now. For anyone who has not heard about this book or seen it yet, kind of introduce us to what Who We Are Now is all about.
Sure, yeah. So thank you so much for having me. First of all, super excited to be here chatting with you. Love your show. Who We Are Now is, very broadly speaking, about four friends who meet in university, and it follows kind of the next 15 years of their lives as two of them become wildly successful in their chosen creative fields, and two of them don't. Not to say they're unsuccessful, but maybe the youthful ambitions or dreams they had for themselves don't fully relate to how their adult lives turn out, as is the case for a lot of us, I think. So the novel's told in four sections, rotating POVs between each of the characters, and spans about 15 years of the story of their friendship until, not too many spoilers here, but a tragic event brings them back together again.
I mean, I don't feel like it's a spoiler because it is like right off the bat.
It's right off the bat. Yeah. Like you see the prologue. I mean, I talked about this at my launch event, so I'm happy to say it. You'll find out if you even open the book to page 1 in a bookstore, but the prologue is set at a funeral. We know one of our four friends in the present day timeline has passed away, but we don't know who. And then the novel flashes back to 2006, which is where it starts, on the eve of their graduation from college.
Let's talk a little bit about the format, because it is kind of unique to have four perspectives and like have one character tell about what's going on for a year throughout this first chunk of the novel. What was the creative process for you in deciding that this is the way to tell this story?
Well, I mean, since the inception of this idea, I think I did know that I wanted it to be multi-POV between the four friends. It's close third person, not first, but that I wanted to be kind of in each of their worlds or in each of their heads at alternating times. However, I had originally set it up that we would just kind of rotate through the POVs at random, and just kind of each chapter would be from somebody else's perspective. And while that was, I think, not a wrong approach, there are a lot of multi-POV novels that I admire that do that. And, the one that I love the most, The Interestings, does that. It kind of stays with one character for a long time and kind of rotates at random. But my editor had the idea that we would be able to really make the book, I think, move a little bit, because it is so character driven, and that it would give it some structure and some motion to rotate consistently through each of the four friends' perspectives and give them each 1 year. And it just felt like a really good way to organize and just give the book some structure. So I credit that all to her. I like to say, I had some kind of divine literary reason for doing it. I didn't. Cassidy Sachs just said, I think this would be a great idea, and I do everything she says. And I was like, great, I would love to try that. And in the end, I think the result is good. I like that we get to spend a full year with each character, and you're kind of wondering what's going on with the others, but you see them, they cross in, you get to see what's happening with them through the lens of that one character, but you're also kind of wondering and waiting to get back to them as well.
So what was the little spark that inspired this story?
There were a few. I've talked about these a good bit if anyone's seen anything about the book, but the first is just I was drawing on, I used my own alma mater as a setting at Northwestern, because I just remember being, a graduating senior from college and thinking, what will the rest of our lives be? I lived with four of my friends, and I remember us talking and, projecting where we would be 5 years in the future. And it was just funny to see what if that happened and what if it didn't. So maybe ever since then, I've thought about, the idea of a story of, where do four people say to each other, this is where my life is going to be in 5 years or 10 years. And then you follow them through that time and see. So I guess that's just part one, is somewhat personal. The second part is that I mentioned already the novel, The Interestings, which I don't want to invoke a direct comparison to, because no one should suggest that their work be compared to Meg Wolitzer, who is peerless. But I loved that novel, and I think there was something in there about the way creative success specifically affects friendships that I was interested in doing kind of a millennial era twist, maybe on some of those same themes. And then, so I guess then those two ideas kind of fused with the fact that I just love a great story about friendship. My first novel, Friends from Home, is about two friends, two women who have grown up together in a small town, and then, focuses on them when one of them is getting married in the present day. And so, yeah, I love a good story about friendship. I wanted to do a multi-POV novel that was about four friends. And yeah, those ideas just all kind of came together to become who we are now, which a fun fact that I'll share is that I actually wrote the beginning of who we are now. So all of the kind of prologue chapters where you see them in college, I wrote that before I even sold Friends from Home, my first book. I had kind of put Friends from Home in a drawer and said, okay, now I have this new idea about four friends, written part of it. And then ultimately I did end up selling Friends from Home, but this story I've been working on, I guess, for about 6 years, like on and off.
What is it about friendship that inspires you to write now at least two novels? We'll talk about in a minute, but at least two novels about friendship.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I really do. I find it very naturally inspiring, and I do get that question of like, why this rather than romance, or rather than, I don't know, thriller or something with more intrigue. And I think like friendship in a lot of ways is sort of the A plot of my life. I've just always found the deep and abiding love between friendships that lasts through other relationships, through marriages, through children, through family, through everything, to be really inspiring and interesting. And I do have friends, from my childhood, from high school, from college, from my 20s that I'm still close with. And just getting to see those things kind of move and breathe and stretch over time, I find is very interesting. They are a very alive and flowing thing between people. And I guess that's why I like to write about them.
You had a quote in the little press kit letter that caught my eye that said that this is what it means to live an interesting life, or this is an exploration of what it means to live an interesting life. Did you come to any conclusions on what it means to live an interesting life throughout the process of writing this book?
Yes, fascinating question. And I think, I think the quote I put was like an interesting and fulfilled life. So those are related but different. Did I come to any conclusions? Well, I think that when you're young, it's very tempting to see life as a failure if it didn't conform to your original dreams or expectations. If you somehow fall short of a goal, whether that could be anything, to go to med school, to get married at a certain point, to achieve a certain level of creative success, to have a child, all of these things that we, and I think potentially women particularly, but there are men and women protagonists in the novel, measure ourselves against as life milestones we must achieve or set for ourselves to achieve. That, yeah, there can be this sense of failure, even if it's not a failure at all, to end up with different dreams than you may have had 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 50 years ago. So I suppose perhaps part of me knew that going in, but I said I started the book 6 years ago, and it's something that has only grown truer and truer for me as I have gotten older, and as I've seen my friends go down a variety of different paths, as I've seen them achieve dreams and pursue different ones. That, yeah, I think to live an interesting and fulfilled life is to be open-minded. It is to not close all of the doors to, this is what I thought my life would look like at 30, and thus I must pursue it even if it doesn't truly fit me. I find that I must find a partner, that I must find this kind of paying job. I hope that people find interest and fulfillment in being progressively more open-minded, rather than as seeing life as something where you have to pass go in Monopoly at a certain time point or another.
So this does deal a lot with success and what we think success looks like.
Yeah.
Kind of touch on, like, since we put so much pressure on ourselves to be successful at a certain point in our life.
Obviously, I think it's a societal thing. I think about this and write about it in other forums a lot, from the perspective of women, as I've mentioned. I do think that there's a societal standard that has been reinforced over and over again, particularly, in America or in the West, about, what women's lives are most for, what they are most fulfilled doing. And we have started to rewrite that narrative. But yeah, there's certainly a societal expectation, I suppose, for men and women, both, people of all genders, that it looks like, schooling, it looks like marriage, it looks like house, it looks like successful job, it looks like kids, and on down the line, right? So societal element for sure. And then I think there's the personal, and this I think is where the millennial thing really comes into it too, being, very broadly speaking, we've had our struggles, but, a generation that was first looked at as like, you were the ones that were always told you were special. My mom is a boomer, and I'm a slightly older millennial. And so I can see that disconnect in the in the generations of, kind of, if you grow up thinking that you are specifically more destined or more primed for creative success or uniqueness, which I think in some ways certain millennials with a certain amount of privilege maybe did, then how do you feel falling short of those creative or professional milestones? So if we've moved beyond, the societal pressure for marriage, house, kids, then now is there also a pressure or expectation that we be special, that we be unique, and that your life is not that worthwhile if you're not famous or not creatively successful. And so I think maybe kind of both of those things. And then of course also self-imposed. Some people I think maybe are naturally a bit more perfectionistic or have been reared in a certain type of environment that encourages, get yourself on a path and achieve X, Y, and Z by this certain time. So yeah, personal, generational, and cultural, I would say. But I want to actually, I'm going to just forced to turn it around on you for 1 second, if you don't mind. Did you, because I'm curious to hear from other people, did you feel that way? Like when you were graduating from college, do you feel like you were someone that had a clear vision that you were like, I really hope that I need to go after these milestones? Because that's, I would say, a good chunk of my friends. And then the other portion are very like, I was very lost. I really had no idea. Where were you in all this expectation of self?
So I was homeschooled.
Oh, okay.
In Kansas is where I graduated high school in Kansas, went to Kansas State. Okay. So the expectations that come from that world are very intense. And so still being unmarried now at 34 and no kids, it's as much as I've tried to move past what other people from a world that I don't hang out with anymore, I think. Yeah. It's still a very challenging thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I'm from Michigan too, a little different background from being, homeschooled or in Kansas, but still similar. I'm from a small town in the Midwest. And so, I'm married and in my 30s and don't have children and don't plan to. And that's still, it's a controversial point for a lot of people that I'm very okay with, but that doesn't compute, for a lot of the people that I grew up with potentially.
There was so much pressure on us to be these things, but we've gone through it. Millennials have gone through it.
Yes.
Society-wide. So that's one of the interesting things about this book is kind of like reading all of these like really bad things that we have had to live through and like how it has shaped us as a generation and like our view of success in light of like the 2008 economic collapse and like the September 11th that plays a little bit into this, how these massive events have shaped us and now as adults. So kind of touch a little on including real life milestones and how they affected millennials specifically.
Completely. Yeah. I went back transparently. I went back and forth a lot on how much to allow, even the book spans 2006 to 2019, how much to include real history in there and how much to kind of make it timeless. I'm actually still not 100% sure how much I love where I landed in that balance. But the fact is, history plays a bit of a role and we talk about some of the shifts that millennials have lived through, but it's not as deep as I could have gone, I guess, without giving anything away. That was important to me simply because as I mentioned earlier, I liked the idea of doing this kind of millennial era twist on themes I'd seen discussed more for older generations, I guess, about reaching what it means to live an interesting and fulfilled life, what success looks like, etc. Just wanted to do that from the millennial kind of experience and the cultural shifts that millennials have lived through over the past 20 years. And you can't do that without bringing real events in, the rise of social media, the recession, for sure. Those are two just like really big things over the last 20 years that have affected, the generation that we're a part of. So yes, I wanted to do that because it felt more authentic and lived in and felt like that was something that just, whether you mention it or not, would shape the way that these people see the world and themselves. If you did this book with the characters of being Gen Z or Gen X, it'd be slightly different. They could have the same, very similar jobs. They could have very similar relationships to one another. But just, kind of the view of success and self, and then some of the individual struggles that are more specific to the characters, like, will I keep my job after the financial crisis? Or, should I give up the steady gig because everyone I know is moving back in with their parents? Those kind of things are very relatable to that moment. So Yeah, not sure if I answered the question, but just made it more relatable and lived in. And I wanted this to be a book that was specifically really a millennial take on those themes, and can't do that without including real history. Several elections are in there as well. Those have an effect, certainly. The Me Too movement. Just all really big seismic things. And as I shared at my book launch event, it's also why I ended the book in 2019. Somebody asked me and I said, well, the true answer is, at that time, all of the characters have gone through something where they're entering a new phase of their lives. And so that did feel like a nice, natural place to leave them. The real answer is I didn't want to do 2020 because I mentioned all the real world events that happened from September 11th to the global financial crisis to the Obama election and re-election to the Trump election. And like, I can't not do the pandemic then, but that would have been its whole own story. And I didn't want to go there. So that's why the book ends in 2019.
That was going to be my next question why not just keep them going through trauma?
Hey, look, in my head, they're all still out there. I could maybe do it. I could do a follow-up of where they are now going into 2024. But yeah, felt like it had spanned a lot of time already. And that was going to be basically, it spans when they're about, 22 to 35, 36. And I think then after that would have been kind of the next phase of life and kind of its own book.
You mentioned going to college at Northwestern, which is where this book is set, and being a journalist. You're going into journalism, which is something I've also done. So what did you learn from your journalism career that helped you while writing in fiction? Because there's such different writing styles.
They are, and I was never that great of a journalist, which made me better at writing fiction. I was a fact checker at New York Mag, like Rachel. It's my first gig, and then went into full time elsewhere. But basically, something that I did learn that was really helpful is interviewing. Is not trying to write things or try to decide that something's a trend without talking to people. At least I think when we were in journalism school, it was like 3 people is a trend. You need to find you think something's a trend, you need to talk to at least 3 different people that are experiencing it that way before you can start writing a trend piece. I think that's something they made us do in, a 101 class. And I still think, even though I'm not writing things that specifically have to be, fact checked, I still want to do that. So I still always interview people and follow people online and all of that have similar identities to my characters. And I certainly did that here. And that was fun. There's actually more research that went into this book than you would think for something that you lived through. I kind of thought, well, it'll start at Northwestern where I went and then go to New York, which is where I moved, and I lived through all of these years. And so, beyond checking a few newspaper headlines, maybe there won't be much to do there in terms of research. But I ended up interviewing a bunch of people, whether that was for, my character Clarissa, who's queer, which is an identity I don't share, or whether it was for my character Nate, who, not a big enough spoiler to worry about it, is working at Lehman Brothers during the time of the financial crisis and the collapse in 2008. And I really thought that I had a good beat on that. And I remember interviewing 2 people who had worked at Lehman during that time period. And I basically sold them this whole story of like, so he's working in equities and then Lehman fails, so I think he's probably going to lose his job. And they basically looked at me like I was an idiot and said, well, equities made money for the business all year and they sold it to Barclays and almost everyone stayed on. So I think that you should. And I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's things like that. I think probably are more, obviously lots of fiction writers are great researchers, better than me. But that's probably something I took from that, is just talking to people and listening to their experiences and weaving it into the book.
What's the best piece of advice that you got for writing fiction while along on this journey so far?
I have a couple, and I feel boring because I think I always say the same ones when I talk to people. But the first is, I've both given it and gotten it, and don't know that anyone's responsible for this advice originally because everyone says it, but it's so true. The first is you can't edit a draft that doesn't exist. So the best thing I've ever learned about being a fiction writer is just like stop fussing with it. I'm guilty of tweaking a sentence or 2, but you just cannot get there if you're going to get bogged down by the fact that your draft is bad, and it will be bad, and that's fine. It's a skeleton to hang other things on. This book happened in revision. Like, I have no idea when this book got written because it never happened front to back on a draft. It was like things were layered in and layered in and layered in 3 or 4 separate times, and eventually we got there. So that's thing number 1, just get to the end of it and edit it when it's done. And then the second piece is, I think there's is Swim in the Pond in the Rain, the George Saunders book. Have you read it? Okay, it's great. It's, basically sort of a condensed version of his MFA class that he gives at Syracuse. And obviously George Saunders is a very, very famous and acclaimed and wonderful writer who I love. And I think he talked about, I had a really big breakthrough when I read A Swim in the Pond in the Rain a couple of years ago, because I think that he is just such a phenomenal stylist, and like, who could ever hope, to be as creative and inventive and unique as George Saunders, right? And he spoke about how he used to want to write like Hemingway. Like, he didn't like his voice, and he was all trying to replicate, staccato sentences and really sparse prose. And reading that, I think I had a realization of like, oh my God, if the person that I think is like the best or one of the best living writers wanted to sound like somebody else, then I need to just get off of that. I'm never going to sound like George Saunders, but that's okay, because I have things that I care about, and clearly, things to say and a unique point of view. And you have to lean into being the writer that you are, I guess, as opposed to who you hope that you could be. And I think that's an ongoing struggle probably for all of us, because we're so inspired by our peers or by the books that we read that made us want to be writers in the first place. But in doing this book, I mean, I had to come to terms with that. It's not the interestings. It's not going to be that. And that's good. It has to be its own thing.
So many authors talk about hitting a sophomore slump with their second book.
Yeah.
Do you kind of run into that problem, or like, how did you handle avoiding it if you did? Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, great question. Well, it's so like known that second books are a beast. And everybody told me that, and I didn't believe them, and then it was true. But I really think that this book was really challenging for me in a lot of ways, but it also wasn't as hard as it could have been. I guess I was like I said, I was warned a lot about the notion of like it being the second book is, an excruciating exercise in trying to recapture what kind of came naturally in the first. And I actually gave that line to my character Dev when he's struggling and trying to write a second book. So the book's a little bit meta in that way. I have him struggling to write a second novel for a while. But no, for me, yes, it was challenging, and I already find the third that I'm working on now, which fingers crossed, to be so much easier. And I don't quite know why that is. The first is hard in its unique way. If I had to guess, I think the first is hard because you don't know yet whether or not you can do it. You've never written a book from start to finish. It feels like looking down, trying to think you can run a marathon if you've never done a 5K. Like it's very big and intimidating in that way. So you do the first one, and then you're like, all right, I did it once. But then going from 1 to 2 is kind of like if you had ridden a bike around your neighborhood one time and then somebody signs you up for the Tour de France. I kind of kept being like, why do they think I know how to do this again? Like, I've done it one time. Like, I'm not ready to, go back in and like finish it in a year. Like, how am I supposed to know how long this will take or how good it will be? And my second book was already under contract because I had a 2-book deal. And so I had to deliver it. And yeah, that is challenging. It's hard to get the first one's hard because you don't know if you can do it. And then the second one, everyone expects you now to know how to do it because you've done it once, but you still kind of feel like you don't. And with the third, now I kind of feel like I've done it enough times that I'm starting to get it going. And I think from here forward, when I talk to authors who have written a lot of books, it's probably going to be up and down, but more project by project than certain books are harder than others. But yeah, the second one is tough. And I think ultimately I approached it just kind of like the first, which is to say, like, you just have to get a draft done. Like, just don't give up, and it will be bad, and eventually you will get there. So yeah, avoiding it, I guess, was treating it like the first one instead of thinking that I should have some kind of divine insight or be better or be faster. It was kind of like just one foot in front of the other, one day at a time.
You touched on book 3.
I did.
So anything you can say about that at this point?
Not really. I'm not supposed to say much about it, but I'm kind of in my I shouldn't, but also who's going to stop me. I've been giving some hints about it, which is just to say that if it is the one that I'm working on now, which I hope it will be, it is set in Bordeaux, where I spent a summer in my mid-20s writing, and that's what I can say about it for now. It's kind of a wine world and trauma. It's a little bit, and so it's different. It's not a story of friendship over time, but it is still a story of a woman that is of great interest to me in a lot of ways. I am very into wine, so writing that world has been really fun.
So you got a blurb from Becky Chalson, who's also been on the show.
Yes, we love Becky. She moderated my launch event. She's the best. We're editor sibling. We're not only imprint siblings, but we have the same editor, and now we're best friends. So
She's fantastic. So what was it like getting a blurb from her and like the support from the writers community?
Yeah, well, I actually blurbed Becky's too. I was, I think, the first person to blurb Kismet because my editor sent it over when it was like in a Word document and was like, think about reading this. And I was like, yes. So yeah, I mean, it's been great. Like Becky's been so supportive. If you've had her on, she's the nicest, sweetest person of all time. So yeah, it was great to have that kind of back and forth between us. And I hope we will be close for many books to come. And then it was really nice, the other blurbs too, because there are a variety of authors in there. One or two that are Canadian. So people I've kind of gotten to know, and I'm honored that have read my work from the writers community here in Toronto, which is filled with a really great group of women's fiction authors in particular. And then, yeah, it was great to have some support from some Dutton siblings and yeah, just kind of a variety of different pieces, especially because, my first book came out in the pandemic. So even though there were blurbs, it was just a different level of like in-person fun and support this time with having Becky moderate the launch. My Toronto event is going to be moderated by Louise Claire Johnson, who wrote Behind the Red Door and is an author here in Toronto. And it's just fun. It's just fun to all know each other. It's fun to do these things with your friends and writing buddies.
So the last question we always ask, because this is literary hype, what books are you hyped about right now?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I have like quite the stack right now. So I do want to shout out Freedom Clause by Hannah Sloan, which I read recently because that was really great. And I think just an unexpected take on a story that I think maybe we might have some expectations for going into about an open marriage. And just, it was really unpredictable and lovely. And that was great. I'm reading Tom Lake right now, like everybody else in the world, I'm sure, but Ann Patchett is just, an absolute icon. That's another person where I'm like, I shouldn't be reading her while I'm drafting, because you read her and you're like, I want to sound like her and I want to do what she does. So Tom Lake is great. I am hyped. I'm looking around here. I am also hyped about, what else did I just get? I really want to read Under the Influence. I've connected with Noelle Crooks. We were Pub Day siblings. Our books both came out on August 8th. And so we've been kind of DMing and just living through this like book release process a little together. And I'm really excited to read that one. I'll stop there. But yeah, I have a huge TBR.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to Literary Hype about your book, Who We Are Now.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was great. And I hope we chat again.
For sure. I mean, when book 3.
No, here's hoping.
Thanks again to Lauryn for taking time out of her day to talk with me about her book, Who We Are Now. If you want to get a copy of this or her first book, those links are down below, as well as where to find her on social media. And while you're down that side of the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the author conversations coming your way. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.